All right. So, welcome all. I'm Paul Hodges. I am one of the administrators of the Sandbaggers Facebook group, the only known dedicated group, 100% dedicated to the television program, the Sandbaggers. We're not a new group. We were set up about 15 years ago. And have been kind of growing and evolving ever since. And as part of that, I'm going to welcome you to our first live global webinar for the members of the group and other interested parties, Sandbagger Two. It's a celebration of the 45th anniversary of the first broadcast of the show in the UK, which for the detail nerds out there was the 18th of September, 1978. So how we got here. I bring maybe a bit of a planning perspective to things. And Zoe and I were talking last fall about what we wanted to do differently this year in terms of content for the group. And we also noted we had the unique opportunity of having this 45th anniversary coming up. So we decided to pull together this webinar because we really, again, have never had a global, and I already see members from the west coast of North America as I travel eastward all the way around to Australia. So how's that? So if there's others, maybe somewhere in the Pacific Islands, we can really circle the globe. But again, we really have members from all over the world coming together for this, and appreciate it. So a little side note: why is it Sandbagger Two? And I've already had a couple astute fans immediately say, well, this must be a follow-up from Sandbagger One, which it kind of really was. Sandbagger One is a little-known in-person convention that Ray Lonin actually attended back in 1992 in New Jersey. So when we were titling this, I said, we might as well call it Sandbagger Two. Jen, if you go to the next slide. All right, so let me cover the agenda. We focused the agenda around the keynote speakers. And as Roy and Greg will be getting into as they talk, we're looking at people that were involved in and influenced by the show. Additionally, Ferox and I are going to be talking about a couple topics that have been numerous times requested by forum members. And I'm also going to announce some new media offerings that are tied to the 45th anniversary of the show. So as I step through the agenda, I'm going to talk about what we hope to accomplish. I'll turn it over to Roy, which is going to talk about his experiences with the Sandbaggers and how it impacted his career and other interesting tidbits in the production of the show. Then I will turn it over to Ferox Hopkirk, who will talk about Ian Mackintosh's work before the Sandbaggers. And in a second, in my formal welcome comments, I'm going to talk about some of the things we hope to accomplish in this overall session. And one of them was learning, right? And so I was shocked to understand what Ian had done prior to the Sandbaggers. I honestly always thought he did worship, he did a couple novels, and he did some airline book. And that was it. And I had really no understanding of the breadth of work he did and was doing at the same time he did the Sandbaggers. So I think you'll find that interesting if that's knowledge to you from Ferox. We're going to take a quick break. We'll have a countdown clock. That's just, again, if you need to go out and, bio break, take a stretch, refresh your drink. But we will start up again immediately 5 minutes after that. I'm going to talk about items from the past decade that were influenced by the Sandbaggers, or I'll call it the direct descendants, other than Queen and Country, which Greg will talk about right after me. It is not an all exhaustive list. And actually, I had probably more items when I went through the rehearsal last week. But in the interest of time, we've got it down to the vital few, but there are others, and we can talk about some of those offline back in our forum at a later date. Then Greg will come on, talk about how the Sandbaggers and Ian Mackintosh's writing style and method of script development impacted him, and he'll talk about his work on the really effectively reboot and influenced by work called the Queen and Country media series. Then we'll announce some new media created specifically for this 45th anniversary item. So just in terms of roles and some mechanics. So Jen Buckley, and we thank her for donating the use of her Zoom environment. She is going to be the official host, let's say, but she really in that aspect will be running the technical Zoom platform. I will be the facilitator taking us through the agenda and passing the items to and from the various presenter. For the people that have joined, your microphones will be off. The only live microphones are the 7 panelists. The chat function is on. I already see a bunch going in there. I'm not going to be able to look at it during this call. I have enough to do to facilitating, presenting, and moderating the Q&A. But it will be lightly monitored by Jen and others. Just to make sure that any questions that were placed in there should be in the Q&A, and I'll go into that in a second. But the chat's really there to allow attendees to share content with each other, and I already see some of this going on in there. Dave's already calling me a lazy slacker. Thanks, Dave. But that's going to be allow you guys to share content and other commentary on what you're seeing. And we will go look at the chat later. How's that? So I will. What I will be focusing on is the Q&A. The Q&A is at the bottom. I already see 10 items in there. The Q&A are going to be for the keynotes only. So at the end of Roy's section and at the end of Greg's section, we will have a Q&A session. Any Q&A for the other presenters, meaning Ferox or myself, can just be put as post that to the Facebook group. We're not going to take time in this session to make that happen. So I'll talk a little bit more about the Q&A when I turn it over to Roy, but that's the background. I've already seen a couple questions for Greg in there, and that's fine because I will wade through them. But my preference would be we're using the same Q&A for both sessions. So if you could add the Roy Q&A in now, okay, and as he speaks. And then I will start looking for the Greg questions after that, and probably will start compiling some of those as Ferox is talking. So, all right, if you can go to the next slide. And then that transitions into my actual welcome slide. So why are we here? We're here to provide a forum. 3 things: to provide, engage, and promote. So we're here to provide a forum to share and learn amongst the members, and even allow the speakers like Roy and Greg to understand what's kind of interests us in the show, right? So they can reflect back on what they've done. We want to engage with the keynotes and each other, but especially the keynotes because they bring a unique perspective, again, of how this had happened, how it came together, and how that has influenced current work, such as the work done recently by Greg. And then we want to promote the group. So I was mentioning this in some of my offline comments before we started, but most of our new members, and we have grown significantly. The count as of a half hour ago was up to 614. We were probably at 350 2 years ago. So that's the amount of growth that we have had. And I find most of our new members are people that knew of the show, loved the show, discovered it over time, and I'll tell you about my journey on that in a moment. But they didn't know the group existed. So again, I think this is in just that aspect, we've already been successful, frankly, because even since I announced this, we've put on over 100 members. So all good. So let me tell you a little bit about how I discovered the show, and it's not to talk about me, but I think it's very typical of the fan base of how they discovered it, especially from the people that were either outside the UK or were not ones that watched the original broadcast back in the 1970s and 80s in the UK. I found the Sandbaggers by accident, frankly, in 1990 on a smaller network in the United States called PBS, or the Public Broadcast System. It was on various times, different cities, no standardization, and I happened to be out of town, and at 10 o'clock on a Saturday night, I ended up seeing it. And as I went back to prep for this, I realized I had started watching it episode 2. So that's the one where we had a cabinet defection and the Lutara assassination that Neil Burnside wanted to have involvement in. What did I see immediately? What I immediately saw in the first episode, what a tremendous script and what tremendous acting. So back to Ian Mackintosh and Roy Marsden and the other people on the ensemble cast. So I got back home. I said, I got to watch more. Again, hard to find when it was airing on PBS because it wasn't every Thursday at 8 p.m. kind of thing. Taped things, traded tapes, gathered fan materials. And this is over the span of like probably a decade and a half. But as I look back, I said, what really made it special? And again, it's going to be Ian's writing, Roy and the ensemble cast. And I'll come back and say, there are no bad actors on that show. There really aren't. I sit back and say everyone portrays their role such that I could see them actually doing it. And there's really no other programs I can say that on. How's that? So, and then it had innovative production, and I'm going to hit an urban myth later about only having a few sets available for the Sandbaggers. But I've watched the entire series probably 15 times, but I'm a nerd, right? I learn something every time, but I'm not the kind of guy that's going to say, well, the third word in the second episode of the second series was right? No, but I am one that likes understanding what the story arcs are, what the concepts are, and what the character and relationships are. That's what I focus on. And the production details. So as a icebreaker, and then I'll turn it over to Roy in a moment, I jokingly called it 44 seconds of shoes. So in June, I watched it, again, probably the 15th, 20th time, I don't know, something like that, prepping for this specifically. And I noticed how many shots in the program revolved around shoes. And I don't know why I never saw that before. It's kind of almost the goofiest thing. But as they're transitioning in and out of shots and sequences, a lot of times as someone's walking in and out of something, they focus down to their legs and the lower half of their legs. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I never noticed that. So then that got me, again, prepping this, looking at the opening credits. Well, in 44 seconds, and you can go time that, there are 7 shots of shoes that I found out in last week that was actually not Roy. And that was not shoes that I will call them validated by Ian Mackintosh. But I'll let Roy talk about that if he wants to again. But the concept of this was a character, we'll say it was the Burnside character, I guess, walking out of the building, walking to another building, and walking up into the elevator in an office in the other building. But just the tight focus on that and keeping that as a linking thing was just, I think, tremendously interesting and tremendously indicative of how the Sandbaggers was put together by the production team. So let me move on. Next is Roy Marsden. We've got Roy, again, we're not holding anyone down in their feet to the fire, but based on last week, Roy had a lot of great comments. So we've taken out of mine other sections to give Roy a little bit extra time. So we're targeting it at 40 minutes. But we're going to allow Roy to talk about, if you can go to the next slide, some intro comments of what was his involvement in the program, how did he get involved, what did he see there, how did it impact his career, what did it mean to him personally, and then I'll talk in a second about the Q&A. So as a facilitator, I guess I officially have to introduce Roy, but I think he doesn't really need a introduction, right? But he is the actor who portrayed the central role in the series, Neil Burnside, the director of operations, or DOPS, for the entire run of the series. And really, if you look at the characterizations and the scripts, they effectively eventually all wrap around and revolve right back to Neil and his experiences. Roy was a RADA graduate and has gone on after the Sandbaggers to have an extensive career spanning many media types, especially stage and other television works. So again, we're going to have a Q&A that I will start compiling as Roy is talking. I see we're already up to 19 Q&A elements, and we're probably approaching 100 participants or so. Again, I will ask them at the end, use the Q&A tool at the bottom. Again, I'm going to try to eliminate duplicates, prioritize the rest. Don't know how many questions we'll get through, but at least I'll try to make sure we have a core small group that we can get right to Roy in this session. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Roy Marsden.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Hello?
Yes.
Oh, you can hear me?
Yes, I hear you fine.
Oh, that's good. here I am. I don't know what time it is of other people around the world, but here I am. It's autumn. It's 4 o'clock. It's a beautiful sunny day, and I'm sitting down by the beach. So I'm very happy. Now, it's interesting you should talk about the Sandbaggers because it is 45 years ago. And to me, it's a long, long way down the path of a career. And there were many things that I honestly and frankly didn't remember about it. But I started when I, was asked to be part of this to look at the program again and to just look back on some of the episodes. And of course, some of the most curious things that have come about because of it are things like there were no mobile phones, there were no computers, there were no means of communication other than, either speaking to each other or phone or telegrams or machinery like that. But in its place, and you notice in each of the episodes, of course, what everyone did was spoke. And that, of course, is completely disappeared from our world now. The idea that at a moment of doubt and a moment of thinking, this prop called a cigarette came into view. And we constantly, everyone said, I'm surprised, we survived. And of course, the very sad thing is that there's a photograph at the beginning there of the Sandbaggers, of the group of us involved. And I seem to be the only one of that whole group who's still around. Everyone else has passed on, unfortunately and sadly. Now, the Sandbaggers was, a complete surprise to me. I knew nothing about it. I happened to be on holiday in the middle of France when I had my agent phoned and said, you must get back here. They want to talk to you about this program. I had no idea what it was. And I arrived back and very quickly they said to me, would you like to do it? I had no idea that it was a series. I thought it was just a one-off program about the curiosity of the British role within the spying community. It went on for, 3 years we made it. And each episode, I later found out, was based. Ian hadn't just made this up at the back of, on the top of his head. He knew stories. How he knew those stories, we will never really find out. But he knew them well. And, I was later informed up at the Foreign Office that many of them were based on events which had actually taken place. Of course, one of the things about the Sandbaggers is, and about the spying stories of that time, was that you had to find a common enemy. You had to find someone who the world was up against. And of course, in the late 70s, Britain, or as is now sort of fashionably called, the United Kingdom, had some status within the world, the special relationship with America, the idea of NATO, the idea of the Commonwealth. So Britain was still, a country of weight. In time, 50 years later, we've settled back to be a smaller island, a country of which I'm enormously proud of its culture and people, but it doesn't carry the same weight in the international community as it used to. Now, this program had to have a common enemy, and the common enemy, of course, was that whole world that had been created by the so-called Churchill's Cold War, and that enemy was the USSR. Now, of course, the idea of Russia and its conflict with Ukraine, that's a different Russia. That's not the USSR. That is a whole new and complex and strange international community. But then we had these stories, all of them, were filtered through the USSR line. And that in themselves made them fascinating because we were innocent. That's, I think, the constant word that comes up when I think about this program, when I think about the stories that were involved, that people thought, oh my God, these things are happening. Nowadays, with the communication, the electronic communication, with international broadcasting, we know so much more about what's happening in the world than we did then. So these programs that were made had a much greater sort of political, but they had a shock element that doesn't exist now. And they were in many senses, made in a way that emphasized that. They were a program of people's thoughts, of people's ideas, of people talking. And nowadays, I mean, the amount of each episode lasts, 55 minutes or an hour, say. And the amount of dialogue that is spoken in that 1 hour compared with a similar program today is enormous. I mean, people just went on talking because that was the communication. The communication now is a much more visual effect. And I'll come on to say what is why I think that's come about. Because we have to take into account that the world of television, the world of storytelling, whether it was in film form or television, a big screen, small screen, has changed enormously. 50 years ago, 45 years ago, the idea of how we made these programs, remember that, they were shot on video, that they were used in multi-camera techniques. They were shot in a studio with many sets. Nowadays, none of that pertains. They're nearly all shot on location. They're shot on a single camera, and they also have a lot of DGI. They have a lot of creation and physicality. A great deal of people chasing each other, car smashes, plane crashes, and all the rest of it. Then it was what was happening was the danger that was happening inside people's heads. Of course, there was a degree of physicality, but nowhere near as much as there would be now. And the idea that you get people sitting around talking about it, the frustration of that community, the frustration of these people. And that is what Ian's writing all the time. You can see that someone was fighting against the system, saying, you're letting this go down the drain. Fight for it, fight for it. These people, our country, the causes we fight for, the morality, these things are important. And nearly every one of those episodes emphasizes that more strongly than you get the programs of today. That's why I think it was an important program. That's why I think it influenced a lot of people, a lot of writers afterwards. And there are many instances of that. And that's why I can remember a dear friend of mine took me around the Foreign Office after we'd finished making these programs, quite a few years later. And she told me, she said, you don't realize that nearly everyone in this whole building, all of these civil servants, all of them, they all know the Sandbagger stories. They all know them because A, they remember them or they were told the reality of them, the background of them, but they watch the program still. So that was quite a shock. I never thought that we would have that sort of impact on drama, but we did. The curiosity of it was that I don't think when we were making it, we quite knew the impact that it was going to have. And indeed it did. I still meet people today who can tell me episode after episode. I still meet people who blame me for this character that I created, or that Ian and myself created. It was fairly unpleasant, Neil Burnside. He's intolerant. He has great passions and he gets caring for people. But it's not somebody I think would be very easy to live with. And I don't fancy going on a holiday with him. I don't think you'd have an easy time. His standards of behaviour were very high, were very, not so much high, they were very tight. And if you didn't come up to those standards, you were held in contempt by him. So he wasn't an easy man. And in a sense, for episode after episode, it became very difficult to hold him on this line without it becoming slacker. And if it hadn't been for Ray Lonnan, who not only, was a fine actor, but because we've all known that, and I've worked with him many times, but he also has got a wonderful sense of comedy. And Ray could always just delightfully underpin the character of Willie Kane, so that, it leavened the programme in a way that it needed it. And I don't think the Neil Burnside character could provide. But that, the idea that you were talking about just beforehand about the opening of the thing and the walking. Of course, what is interesting about that is that we were dealing with an old world, that world of central London, of Whitehall, of Parliament, of Downing Street, the Foreign Office, the Home Office. And they were all within a close and short walk of each other. And so that people who wanted to talk would walk backwards and forwards across roads, across Whitehall, out to Parliament, backwards and forwards. And conversations held at the back of all that would then lead up to Buckingham Palace, and that was St James Park, which St James Park was a location we used the whole time where people who wanted to have private conversations, which couldn't be overheard by microphones or leaked lines, could hold. So that was used a great deal, as indeed it was in life. So that the idea of walking, that sort of movement, was inherent in reality, and Ian had captured that in the programme. And you're quite right. The feet at the beginning were a total surprise to me because I always thought that if there was supposed to be me, they'd chosen the wrong size foot and the wrong shoe, because Neil Burnside was fastidious in his clothes. And when you look at the way that character I played dressed, that didn't come entirely from me. That mostly came from Ian Mackintosh, the writer, who said, these clothes have got to be precise. I know exactly who made those shirts. I know exactly who made those suits. I know exactly where those shoes come from. And all of them came from, handmade, hand-tailored. They didn't come out of a theatrical costumier. That was Ian's choice. And by God, he was right. He knew when you put those suits on, you felt differently than you would if you'd bought a suit, off the peg. That world, of course, has changed. But there was one in some of the episodes, I wear a suit which is a sort of pink colour. And I remember Ian choosing this suit, and we were going off to the tailors, and he said, that's the suit we're going to have it made out of that material. And I said, why? And he then recounted this story of when I don't know who he was working for, but he chose to wear one of these pink suits. And everyone, his bosses, were outraged at his behaviour, and he got very told off very badly for wearing one. So this was his small revenge, his little taste on that moment, and that was always delightful. And whenever I wore it, in whatever episode I wear, it used to make me smile a great deal. We shot these things very quickly in an odd way. I mean, my partner is a filmmaker, and I was talking to her the other day about how long it would take to make an episode, and she said, well, of course, the curious thing, it actually takes longer now, because of all the post-production, because of all the editing and everything else that goes into it. And yet, when we made those programs, we would rehearse in a rehearsal studio with the sets and everything built for a fortnight, and then would shoot all of that internal stuff for a week, and then we would then go on location and shoot for a week. So in a month, we would make completely that whole episode, and it would be finished. That doesn't happen in that way now. We don't make programs in that way anymore. And I think that's a pity. It's a pity for the actors, because the joy of that period of rehearsal, of discovery, meant that we had time to explore what these people were, time to explore where they came from, what their function in society was. And in a reality, nowadays, you just arrive in the set, the car brings you to the studio, and you're thrown in, and before you know, you've had time to make any choices, you're committing the program, and you're making it. And quite often, you make it wrongly. But that's my opinion of it. It was an enjoyable show to make, because I think the people involved, I mean, it came from Ian and Mackintosh, the writer, and he was more than a writer, because I've made hundreds of programs, and often a writer will contribute the program and you hardly see him. Ian was there all the time. Ian was there encouraging, and he had an eyebrow. I could see, if I just finished a scene, I would often just wick across at him and look at him. And if that eyebrow was raised, it meant I would like that scene to be reshot. And we would go again, because he knew whether it was right or wrong, and I relied on him hugely. And Michael Ferguson, who is also no longer with us, was the director and producer. And we spent a very close and happy time working for all that period of time and on other series together. And the sad thing is, I often wonder what would have happened if Ian hadn't, and Graham and Sue hadn't tragically died, out in the Bering Straits or wherever it was that aircraft went down. How long the series would have gone on, because its popularity and the joy of us all making it, I think it would have just continued. But of course we were left, I think if it happened, we were actually filming in Malta, strange enough, and for the programme when we got the news. And I mean, we were stunned that he had died, or that moment was missing. And then, of course, the reality was that would be the end, this end of this family, the end of this making. And we tried with other writers who were fine writers, but it had gone. That heart, that centre, which was Ian, had just gone. And we moved on, and that was it. And we moved on, and in a world of reminiscing or a world of programs like this talking about it. But our world had changed. Our world had, that was yesterday. And that, I think, what it is, in the sense of drama, should be. It shouldn't last forever. Maybe, there weren't a lot more stories, or maybe that world would have changed. What would have happened to Willie Kay in his wheelchair? Did he survive? Did he die? We'll never know. That was always a moment that we used to laugh about. And Ray and myself used to sit there and think, well, I could have taken, oh no, you couldn't have taken, you weren't, and all of that used to go on forever. But the programme was fun. I think it had an important role within the function of British television at that time. It also said quite a bit about the world that was Britain. I mean, you have to think that when we look back on it now, we're looking back at nearly 50 years ago. If you took that moment and put it 50 years before that, we're talking about that period when Hitler was just coming into power. I mean, it's a lifetime, and it's a lifetime before that. That is the changed world. That is the world that we rely on. The idea that we think, it will go on forever, our world, it's constant. It isn't. We change all the time. And our society has changed. The people that run it change. The people that we value, our standards, everything alters, not necessarily for the good, but it alters. And that's life. So, I don't think I've got anything more to say at this moment. If you'd like, to ask questions, I'm very happy to answer any questions you like about anything.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Roy. I have to admit, I didn't catch every word you said because we had so many questions and I've had to be cycling through them, right? But I think I caught just of what you said. But if I ask something you've answered, I apologize ahead of time. That's the reason I'm saying that, Roy, because I'm trying to multi-work here. So let me start with the first question that 5 people have asked, right? That I've had to go back and say we'll cover it. And I think you talked about most of this, but let me ask the whole question. And I know you already covered pieces of this. So the question is, there's a bit of an urban myth on what would have been the continuation of the Sandbaggers into a series 4, with comments being made that Willie would be de-ops from a wheelchair and your Burnside role taking a more senior role, such as either CEO or deputy chief or some other role. So can you comment on that? And was that actually a vision discussed by Ian, the producers, or just general discussions? So
to my knowledge, there was never any discussion there. What there was conversations between Ray and myself, sitting there having supper in an evening, where we said, what do you think could have happened? And that was all. It never ever went further than that. I mean, certainly the producers of the company, which was a company called Yorkshire Television, no, it never occurred to them. I think they realised that once Ian had left, the weight of the writing, the actual quality, the karma of that writing had gone, and we couldn't, and there was no way you could reproduce it. He was a very special writer, and I think one of the sadness is not, of course, the sadness to his family and everyone else and the loss of it, but it was a big loss as a writer to our, to the entertainment industry, irrespective of whether it had been in films, whether it had been on the radio, whether it had been on television. He was a big loss. So there was never any proper, discussion at that level. And then I can remember that there was a story that I think one day Ray and I, this was a long time after, where he, of course, was in total retirement as this, crippled man that had been shot in his wheelchair, and he was retired, living in a garden somewhere, and he was asked to go and rescue someone who had been working for the department in Russia, and by that time my character had totally disappeared. And that's the only reference that we've ever had to any of it. So in that sense, it's a sort of urban myth or a jollity by itself. But I think it really came about because in that last episode, no one knew whether he had died or whether he actually survived. And so that was basically the comedy. Oh, yes, I've survived, said Ray. And others said, no, thank God we've got rid of you.
Okay. The quick follow-up was why in Malta? Was there some?
No, Malta was, the government of Malta were extraordinarily. They were building an organisation called Malta Films because they realised the climate there, the conditions there could be seen to be anywhere of the deserts of the Sahara, anywhere in the Mediterranean. It was a wonderful place to film. It was easy to get to, and the government of Malta were very compliant with the closeness of Britain and Malta over a long period of time, especially during the war, was very close. So that the facilities and the care that they provided to us, and I filmed there quite a few times, I mean, with other programs too, and they were just amazing. But there is I will tell you an extraordinary story, which is nothing really to do with the Sandbaggers, except it is. While we were filming there, and the representatives from the government would often come and help us and at the airfields and places. And I remember saying to them one day, oh God, how far Malta is from Africa, from Libya? And they said, well, in fact, it's a very short flight. And I said, I would love to go and see the expanding, Roman theatre of Leptis Magna. And they said, oh, well. Anyway, one day a car arrived, took me to the airport. It was a Sunday, which we weren't filming. They flew me to Libya. A car picked me up, drove me about 200 miles along the coast. And we looked at this wonderful, they took me a few hours, took me around this wonderful, wonderful building. And then we drove back. And as we were driving back, we came to a wadi when there was a lot of tentage. And the car stopped, and a man with a policeman with a gun stopped us and asked what we were doing. And he then went over to a man who was sitting by these tents, and then came back after a few minutes and said, excuse me, called me out and said he would like to meet you. And I went over, and there, sitting, drinking tea, was Gaddafi. And I thought, my God, what do I say? I mean, he spoke, his English wasn't wonderful, but it wasn't bad. He, after all, had trained with the British Army at at Sandhurst. And so he was asking what we were doing, what the programme was, why we made it, the fun, what was the theatre like in England at that time. Asked me all of those sort of pertinent questions. And after about 20 minutes, we shook hands and said, we got in the car and flew back to carry on filming. So that's where the curiosities of our industry often take you.
Wow, that is an interesting one. And you had not shared that last weekend, so that's great. I'm going to combine about 5 different questions in this one as well. Right, so everyone is everyone, but at least 5 people are talking about. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you channeled the Burnside character? So there's questions along the lines of, and I know you have an extensive theater background. Were there any theater roles you played that led into how you portrayed him? But most of these talk about the fact that Burnside was deep, complex, and 4 of them talk about how dark he was. So is there, and then any other inspiration you had for his role? So and can you talk a little bit about on that?
Yes, of course. It was quite easy to do. For me, acting I've never found it easy. I mean, anyone can act, like anyone can play 3 chords on a guitar, but to be able to act well is a rare and difficult talent. And I have never found it that I don't have that facility and never have done, but that's all I've ever done since I was 8. But that character, as soon as I read the first script, and I knew very much what it is, and talking to Ian, and it was based a great deal on Ian. It was his body movement, the way that Ian would stand with his hand. If you notice, in many episodes, Burnside always has his hands in his pockets. And that was exactly what Ian did all the time. Ian would have, you could always tell that, there were problems that were going on that people weren't answering. And that's what Burnside deals with. So I used Ian as the base plate for building this. But I had to find a physicality for him, because after all, that had been his background within the armed forces beforehand, so that you knew the man wasn't slight. He wasn't, physically weak. So that you had to have that sort of energy, that sort of dynamic to him. What he didn't seem to have was a great deal of humour. It's as if one longed for a scene where actually did laugh and break out, and it happened very rarely. And it's quite interesting, the relationship with Wellingham's daughter, who he married, and that saga that went on, that sort of doubt, that sense of regret. So those were the bases on which I used to build that character. And it's also the fact that, constantly, when you look at the sets within the studio sets, his offices, the secretary's office, the Wellingham's office, the Foreign Office, all of those places, internal places, which were built every month in the studios up at Yorkshire, up at Leeds. And there were a lot of them. There were a lot of these sets, and they had lots of corridors. And we got to the habit of, because Burnside couldn't sit still. Many of those episodes you see him, that it's a restless soul. So that we would quite often shoot scenes where, he was walking along corridors, he was coming in from places. It wasn't just, there he was in a sedentary position. So that when he was captive, like a schoolboy, in front of the headmaster, when he was in front of his bosses, there he was. And you could tell that he was awkward in the way that he sat there and he wanted to get up and say, oi, 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 come on. But was not allowed by, the sense of decorum. So those were the physicalities that I used on the character, the way the costumes and things. I knew how he dressed. I knew why he was the way he was. But a lot of it was helped and based on Ian Mackintosh and his stories and the way that he saw the.
Okay. Kind of a follow-up to that. Did you find that playing and creating that character affected your outlook in any way, right? Or was it just truly a role and you separated it from how you looked at the world?
Yeah, exactly. I didn't. It was, I think, as actors, there's many. I played hundreds of different parts in all different sorts of ways. But there are certain. I do. I've been asked to play roles similar to that many times, but not as they're not. They were never as complete as him. But the sort of authority roles are the roles where authority was being constantly undermined. Were some of the things which make it attractive, I think, as an actor to play. But I was never a light actor. I can remember at drama school, the teachers would say to me, "You will grow into yourself. You're a boy still, even though I was a young man." And it took me quite a time before that sort of weight, not physical weight, but the weight of an actor, I grew into. And I think that Dalglish Burnside was the character that mostly, I created, happened then. And then later on, a couple of 3 years later, I went on to make a very long series of a detective series. And it was quite difficult to slough off the memories of Neil Burnside and that writing into this new world of detective writing, which was Dalglish. Okay. So that was how I found that. But you have to appreciate that actors, well, certainly in this country, we're all we're there hostage to whatever we're offered. It's very difficult to actually mark a path for yourself. You just suddenly you walk around a corner and you're offered this part, or someone thinks that you might be, and your world changes.
Okay. I think we're only going to have probably time for one or two more questions. I'll ask one that probably would be a quicker one first. Did you know Laura's fate before this, or Laura Dickens' fate before this series started, or were you made aware of that while the shooting was going on?
It was a total shock to all of us. I mean, what used to happen in rehearsals was, the first day of rehearsals, you'd all gather and you'd have a cup of coffee at 9 o'clock and you say, "Oh, hello, Brian, hello, Bill." All the rest of it would go on. And then you'd sit down and you read the script. That was the first time I read that script. I hadn't seen it before that Monday morning. And at the end of the reading, it took an hour and a half to read it, all sitting round, the lot of us, and there was total silence. And I can remember people saying, "We can't do this. I mean, it's outrageous." And we all found, and it was right the way through filming, it was totally outrageous. But we shot that whole exchange that took place at the sort of gates of Berlin. That was shot in some huge, great warehousing estate over one night with great, fire engines firing rain all the time, and it was a tiring scene. And to finish it up with her being shot was, and then there was a wonderful scene. That scene all was terrific, but the best scene of all, it was a fine piece of acting by Ray, was in the scene next door. I think it was in a hotel room or somewhere, where he actually accuses me of my behavior and I try and make an excuse. And the moral indignation of Willie Kane was just a powerful, beautiful piece of acting that he did.
Exactly. And then, follows a follow up on that is, you got into the second series, and then there were some advances by Jana Sheldon's character, Karen Milner, and you had rejected her advances, right? So, and again, it's just probably more of a comment, but one of the questions asked is, it was interesting to see Willie ask why you were angry with, again, Jana's character, and you replied because she's alive, right? And I think that, kind of arcs very well on the series. How's that?
Yeah.
So, okay. Well, Roy, there are some other questions, but again, they just keep rolling in, and we're going to move on. I will talk to you offline afterwards. How's that? Whether I could email you these, or we could save these for a different session some other time. But
well, you could anything you like. I mean, if you'd like to email them to me, that would be terrific. I can answer them, or if we have another session of this, if people want to, we can talk some more. It would be nice if we could do this next time visually, rather than just speaking like this. I think because I think there's a future. Put it like that.
Yep. Okay. Understood. Again, thank you so much for coming on, and you're obviously welcome to stay the rest of the session. You can hear some of the other good discussion that goes on if you want. If you can't, and you have something scheduled, that's completely fine. We will get you the other questions, and we'll work out how you can get the answers back, and we can get them posted back to the group. So again, I want to, on behalf of everyone, thank you for your participation. So,
my pleasure.
All right, if you can go on. Yeah.
Bye-bye.
All right. So if you want to go on to the next slide, Jen. So I will introduce Ferox Hopkirk. Ferox joined us 7 months ago, and I know they laughed when I said this in the rehearsal last week. But I had this view that this was someone momentous and important coming on when I was getting comments either online in the group or offline chat sending me, "Hey, so happy Ferox has joined," or "Ferox is here," and one of my other loves is classic rock and roll music, and it made me think of the spray painting on the walls of London in 1969 of Clapton as God. So obviously Ferox is someone I needed to see the value that they brought, and immediately I saw their deep knowledge of Ian's work before the Sandbaggers. And as I kind of mentioned earlier, that's a gap of mine. So I kind of watched and was familiar with obviously the work done on the Sandbaggers, and I had a touch point on a few items, but most of it I really had no idea. So again, back to the purpose of our forum, having a ability to engage and share and learn. I think Ferox can and will bring that to the table. They are also now an admin of our group. So with that, Ferox, I will turn it over to you in 15 minutes on Ian before the Sandbaggers.
All right. Hi. Well, hello, ladies and gentlemen, friends and enemies. As Paul said, I'm Ferox, one of the admins of the Sandbaggers Facebook group. And honestly, I'm just a random person on the internet with an interest in older British television. And it's a good pleasure to interact with so many other people with the same little niche interest that I have. So this talk will just be a whirlwind tour through Ian Mackintosh's work before the Sandbaggers. I'm sure most of us in attendance here are aware that the Sandbaggers series is rather short due to the sudden disappearance of the creator, Ian Mackintosh. And most of us have likely heard the conjectures about Mackintosh's actual role in the intelligence community. But that's a whole other topic. I'm not going to be talking about that. I'll be focusing on the other works of Mackintosh and his characters that he created, which, while not top secret, they have stayed out of the limelight. Next slide, please. Jen, next slide, please. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Jen, are you there? That's fine. Yeah, go ahead and keep talking first. I'll drop them a note because I don't think I have the ability to take over control and move it. How's that? So.
Okay, no worries. And his first 5 novels were typical 1960s pulpy spy adventure stories, populated with drug lords, private investigators, busty women, and secret agents. A far cry from the Sandbagger style. At this time, Mackintosh was stationed at a naval base in Scotland, although the particulars of where he was on any given day was quietly obscured in his records, and his downtime was spent building elaborate worlds with red-blooded heroes and villains. The prose in these early works tends towards being very heavy-handed. It almost comes across as if he is purposely mocking the spy genre. A more generous critique has said that these stories are, quote, so bad they're good. Less generous critiques call them putridly overripe, hilariously, audaciously bad, and rubbish. But through the various types of plots, the protagonists are all of the same cloth. Heroes who spend page after page pining for love, but the women couldn't care less for them. Men stricken by self-doubt and self-loathing, loneliness and longing, but with a very deep sense of what is good and pure, of true romance. They're struggling against the cheap pleasures of the flesh and anger issues. It's good, hearty, lurid stuff, and the writing itself has a rhythm that really draws you in. And in my opinion, it's unfair to judge these first works too harshly, because it's very obvious from these early works that Mackintosh knew how to write. But what he needed was a better idea of what kinds of stories to write. Next slide, please. And the stories that he would write were Warship, which a lot of you have probably watched. He got his guiding hand when he met writer and producer Tony Coburn, who wanted to make a show that would promote the Royal Navy. Coburn may be best known for coining the term TARDIS for an obscure old British sci-fi show called Doctor Who. Mackintosh and Coburn had an immediate rapport, and their collaboration produced what I think is one of the more monumental television series of the 1970s, Warship. There really wasn't anything like it on TV at the time. The real footage of shipboard operations gave it a documentary feel, but with the compelling plots and the excellent actors. Within the structure of this one-hour show, Mackintosh's stories became punchy as well as poignant. The day-to-day interactions between the officers, as well as the difficulties faced by the lower decks, were grounded in Mackintosh's own experiences, of course, and gave the show a genuine and very human touch. Working hand in hand with the Royal Navy, they had the use of real working frigates, helicopters, aircraft, and submarines, which they just loved having access to all these big machines to play with. The ship's actual crew got to see how a television show was made. They loved that. The actors and crew got to experience life aboard a warship. They loved that. By all accounts, it was a very friendly relationship, with the actors in uniform being treated according to their fictional rank and sharing meals and stories with the sailors. Now, the stories of Warship cover a lot of territory, like stories of love, loyalty, espionage, disasters, moral quandaries, generational differences, hostage situations, diplomatic incidents, more espionage, the loneliness of command, the horrors of war, the struggle for peace, and always about the mere humanity of the exceedingly professional crew and everyone they encounter. The plots are taut and the dialogue smart, as you would expect. We meet plenty of Soviet agents who are perfectly comfortable operating in the UK and perfectly comfortable sending operatives aboard Navy vessels. We see destabilizing events in unnamed Middle Eastern states, the handiwork of intelligence agencies around the world. We see a secret biological warfare facility and a presaging of the events of the Falklands War. Now, I like to say that Warship is the Sandbaggers seen from the other side. Our protagonists, the captains, are often sent on missions like, hey, go pick up this defector, or hey, keep an eye on this Russian submarine for a little bit. Always uninformed of the true purpose, with occasional scenes flashed back to the quiet wood-paneled intelligence offices with people like Peel and Burnside deciding their fates from a desk. The frigate captains chafe at being left in the dark and used as pawns, putting their men at risk for some shadowy game of international politics by an agency that has no empathy for the people on the front lines. The backroom intelligence agents see the warship captains as naive, foolhardy, and even stupid. After all, they don't have all the information. But in Mackintosh's world, the captains frequently turn the tables on the intelligence agencies. The captains are striving for peace, while the agents are depicted as amoral figures who disregard humanity in favor of securing their grand schemes. And in the show, our leading men, you see two of them here, they tend towards the stoic, staying calm and unswayed by the romantic plot lines. But the first Warship novel, there with Donald Burton there on the lower left, falls back a bit onto that earlier overripe quality. It's been criticized for being too simplistic and giving the captain an impossibly beautiful young woman to swoon over. I'm not one of the critics, though. I feel that the depth of emotion painted by Mackintosh was incredibly personal. It feels like the plot about political upheaval in some island nation was secondary to this protagonist's internal struggle with this flaming desire and honor. And again, in this book, we see the themes of the doomed nature of love, the struggle between chastity and lust, and having this incredible passion interrupted by tragedy. And the other two novels are very close in topic and in pacing as the show's more straightforward, peril of the weak stories, with much more mature exploration of the psychologies of the captains, and a depth and subtlety that didn't quite make it into the television version, at least the last two series, in my opinion. The final installments of both the show and the books include something of a leading lady, a young woman who carries the trauma of having seen her lover killed in front of her. And I don't want to get too spoilery with specifics, but having a loved one killed in front of you and the haunting guilt that results from that trauma comes up time and again in Mackintosh's stories. The most disturbing and shocking being, of course, the one we see in Sandbaggers. Now, I would say Warship is a complementary show to the Sandbaggers, as it's sort of an idealistic world which Neil Burnside has left behind. I do recommend it, especially the first two series and the novels. Next slide, please. Wild Alliance. Now, perhaps encouraged by the popularity of some of his humorous Warship episodes, yes, there are some, they're quite hilarious, Mackintosh then tried his hand at a light thriller. Our heroes this time are Rupert and Amy, a bickering yet committed married couple. They both are crazy in love, and they're very, very physically affectionate, living a settled middle-class life, although with the conceit, the television conceit of always being in some middle of some crime or other that Rupert feels compelled to solve. And for some reason, ghosts are real in this show. Rupert is the author of thriller novels with his study decorated with model planes. You might think he's supposed to be a version of Mackintosh, much as Burnside was, but Rupert is this petulant, obnoxious airhead, and he's afraid of flying. So the similarities kind of stop there. Now, of most interest to Sandbaggers fans would be the first episode with Jerome Willis, in which the government takes an interest in the writer's stories and uses the power of breasts to dazzle Rupert. It depicts the intelligence agents as bumbling and clueless, easily outwitted by a pair of ditzy civilians. And eventually, after almost publishing top-secret defense technologies, the author has to sign the Official Secrets Act and have his manuscript subject to governmental review. So the television show is kind of goofy, but the Wild Alliance book again returns to these familiar themes of trauma, of loneliness and longing, although this time through the eyes of a professional assassin who is haunted by his occupation. He's trying to do one good thing with his life before hopefully leaving the killing game behind, and finds himself jealous of the love and trust that Rupert and Amy share. And there's other stuff going on in this story. It's an exotic tropical location with gangsters or whatever, but the focus is clearly on the psychology of the hitman and whether he will be redeemed, whether the reader will find it in their heart to forgive him, whether he will find love, or even if he deserves it. He does deserve it. Now, there are many good stories from established television writers of the time and high-power acting talent, but in my opinion, this show has a real rough draft quality to it, like it needed a couple more rounds of editing, or could even be trimmed down to a half-hour show. Next slide, please. Yeah, Thundercloud. Now, not much to say about this one, as I haven't seen it, but it is the half-hour comedy series filmed at HMS Forest Moor near RAF Menwith Hill, which is currently a large intelligence and defense installation in the middle of Yorkshire. The premise is the HMS Thundercloud is a landlocked naval base that is on the books as a seafaring battleship in World War II. So receives ship supplies from the Admiralty that are put to good use by Jimmy Cosmo there on the top right, looking quite handsome in that uniform. Meanwhile, secret experiments on radio and radar are carried out, and of course the temptations of the local vicar's daughter are thrown in. You can't have a British comedy without the vicar's daughter. It sounds thoroughly silly, actually, and I would guess that this half-hour format helped keep the humor more on track. I would love to see it someday. Next slide, please. And these last three are all kind of going on at about the same time as the Sandbaggers, right at the very end of the 70s. These various airplane books. Now, airplanes and flying were Mackintosh's first love and lifelong obsession. If you've been hanging around the Sandbaggers page, you've likely read excellent biographical posts detailing Mackintosh's initial interest in joining the RAF, his love of aircraft and making models, and all things flying. His airplane books can be a little bit technical, but they still show this absolute joy of writing about the things he loved. His encyclopedic knowledge, coupled with his clear style of writing, make for a very engaging read. Even if you're not into airplanes, they're just fun. All these books are filled with gorgeous photographs, artwork, technical drawings. And for me, being an American of a certain age, it's a trip down memory lane to read his guide to North American air carrier liveries, only a small number of which survive today as they existed in the late 1970s. As I mentioned last time, like the Alaska logo, if you know, Alaska Airlines has the smiling Eskimo. Back in the 70s, it was a frowning Eskimo. And I learned from Mackintosh's book, they changed it to smiling to make it more friendly. In the introduction to the book, the editor says he is looking forward to having Mackintosh as a regular contributor to this airplane identification book series, which is another thing we lost when we lost Mackintosh. So in summary, from a Sandbagger's perspective, which ones do I recommend? Well, definitely the show Warship, especially the first two series, and the novel versions of Warship, the novel version of Wild Alliance, and the novel version of Sandbaggers, because some of the novels are just retellings of the episodes, but they do go into so much more character depth, so much more psychology plumbing, and Mackintosh's writing itself is just so much fun. Thank you, Paul, for organizing this event. Special thanks to the Mackintosh family and the Coburn family who have shared so many stories with me. And happy 45th anniversary, everybody.
Thank you very much, Ferox. Great overview of Ian's work. And I know I learned a lot. Even the second time hearing it, I've learned a lot. So again, I thank you. All right. Thank you, Jen, for the countdown clock. Yep. Thank you for moving forward. Welcome back, everyone. Again, hope you had ability to stretch, bio break, get a refresh on your drink, and we'll pick right back up. Two things mechanically. If you could start loading any questions you have for Greg in the Q&A, and then I will go through the Q&A while he's doing his talk, because he comes on right after me. And nothing you need to do right now on this, Jen, but I'm stuck in the mode of replying only to one message over in the webinar chat, and I've not been able to figure out why. So I'm not able to reply to anyone else, but it's no big deal because I'm not really monitoring it anyway, but I just wanted to let you know that, Jen. So, all right, so let's move on to the Sandbaggers legacy. And, you know, I say this often to people, but it's for people who've never heard of the Sandbaggers. So a lot of my Facebook friends, what is the Sandbagger stuff you're always in? So, you know, here's the way I would describe it. And none of this is negative, even though, you know, maybe one would initially think this. You know, it's a 45-year-old program. It was a success in the UK, probably a moderate success is where you would put it on the scale, but it really had spotty distribution globally, right? So it didn't come out right after it was aired there. So the important topics that were going on, like the START and other missile treaties that were going on in the third season, kind of really had the world had moved on before it came out, let's say, in the United States. And it was something that had no follow-ons, right? So you got your content and you're done. Right, you know, you had a couple novels, a couple short stories that were back in the TV Times magazines, but other than that, that was about it. So, what's the secret sauce that made this important, such that we have a legacy that we need to talk about? So, really, in my view, it's three words: it's authenticity, expertise, and professionalism. Right. So, you started with the authenticity that Ian Mackintosh brought up, and Roy did a great job talking about that. So I won't go long on that, but you know, since he was in the intelligence services for the Royal Navy, therefore he brings that authenticity. And then the expertise he crafted, and this is why Ian, before the Sandbaggers, was really an important topic to talk about, and I thank Ferox, because that helped Ian understand better how to write scripts, pull in viewers for the episode without forgetting the series story arcs. So, and I've seen multiple views of what the story arcs are, and I'm just going to throw you out my view of what they are. Okay, it's not that they're right or wrong, they're Paul's view. So series one to me was about Laura, right? Why did he need Laura in his life? How did he get Laura in his life? And what had to happen to Laura by the end? The second series was a year later, which actually makes a lot of sense, because after the initial emotion of the loss, what was Neil after Laura? How did he, and there was a question on that in the last one, how did he react to Karen Milner's interest, right? And again, that great line of "She's alive, Willie," right? That really says it all. And then, frankly, the third season to me series was about him being mad about Laura, him being mad about the decisions the British government was making that led to the scenario where he had to do what he did at the end of episode 1. Or series 1, sorry. So, and there are other story arcs I've seen, but that's the expertise. And then the professionalism we've talked about is the cast and the production crew. So there's a lot of works influenced by the Sandbaggers and Ian Mackintosh. I can't go deep on any of them, and I had to reduce the list, frankly, from our dry run because we had to make up a bit of time. So think of this as a teaser, and it's how to get more content. Again, there are a number of ones we can talk about, and we can take other discussions back into our forum. I'm going to ask you to look at the Queen and Country Q&A, and please load that out there. And if you could, you're at the right place. So I'll start with the Bureau, or in French, Le Bureau de l'Agent, and it's the first of a couple TV series I'll talk about. To me, it's the second best spy series ever. Now, you can jokingly know what number 1 is, right? But, let's again cycle back on how it was so influenced by Ian and the Sandbaggers, right? It's based on real life events, Ian, okay? It centers on France's DGSE, which is their version of MI6/SIS. And it's a level deeper than the Sandbaggers because it's specifically about their deep cover operations group. So it's kind of like a level down below the Sandbaggers, let's say, meaning the Sandbaggers as the characters, okay? And the characters have legends, which is why it's Le Bureau de l'Agent, right? So it's the legends that they have, which is the cover identity that they end up using. And the focus on this series, interestingly, is on an operations character, a GM. We'll call him equivalent to Willie Kane. And he's just gotten back from a 6-year assignment. And now he's got to re-engage to his family and colleagues. And there is some contact, but not an awful lot when you're out there. So you can imagine having a family, and then you need to now disengage for 6 years. So kind of crazy. But he gets back, and he's immediately thrust into, and again, back to now the list that would be the tick list of Ian Mackintosh's, organizational politics, departmental politics, double agents, and something that would have been fascinating to see in the Sandbaggers, a full spectrum audit by internal affairs, because the service itself, and this one would be the DGSE, were just uncomfortable with the skill set, the level of expertise, professionalism, and the activities that were done by GM. So the way to deal with that is bring in internal affairs and work that through. So, and I would end by saying it makes it very similar to the Sandbaggers, and sometimes you have to question, even in the Sandbaggers, whether the service itself is an enemy, right? As much as the Russians in terms of the Sandbaggers and the Bureau, again, you can see was done 2015 to 2020. So it's dealing with a lot of issues going on in the Mideast at that time and the impact of France. So, and all these, I have a little tagline at the end, and I'm not going to give any spoilers as I go through this, or I intend not to, but you got to look at this as a love story, because it is. And there was some movie that did this. I never got a chance to look it up since last week, so I forget what it was. But some movie told you in the first 3 minutes what the movie was, and no one listened to it. And then they got to the end and they go, "Oh yeah, right." So they say within the first episode or two, this entire series is a love story at the end of it. And when you get to the end of it, you realize exactly why it is. And everyone always goes back everyone ends up always going back to rewatch the show, because now they have a different perspective to watch it in. So great show. Recommend you find it. Available on DVD. Next slide, please. So the show that's probably the most like, to me, bar none, the Sandbaggers, and the most influenced by it is Rubicon. Rubicon was a little-known U.S. series from the AMC network. It's about an innocent staffer, really, that was kind of somewhere in the bowels of a private intelligence agency, and we do have those in the United States, and they provide intelligence analysis to places like the Defense and Intelligence Bureau, the CIA, other places like that. And this person's thrust into a major conspiracy, but more importantly, and similar to the Sandbaggers, a focus on workplace dynamics. So, unlike the Sandbaggers, this show had the turnover of the main screenwriter called the showrunner. So it changed its focus a bit, but as it changed it, I think it even changed it even more towards the Sandbaggers. So, reviews you'll see on this show, oh, it's slow paced. Oh, it's too complex. Well, you know what? Paul translates that to meaning it's intellectual, because you would say the same thing about the Sandbaggers if you watched that today and only had the vision of television programs of the last 10 years. So, I consider it a very intellectual program. You can see it in its skillful writing, the acting, and the really carefully crafted storytelling. And the last line in the little write-up I pulled really says it. It's an eerily quiet world in which small moments, events, and pieces of data can generate great suspense. So, so much like some of the small mechanics within the Sandbaggers. Unfortunately, just like Series 3 of the Sandbaggers, it ended too soon. It was canceled after a year. It had a great kickoff. The ratings dropped, unfortunately, as it went. I kind of really wish we were able to see more. There's a couple other series out there, and I've told some people in the group that I would address them. Unfortunately, I don't have the time to go through whole slides on it, but there are other shows like Spooks in the UK, which was called MI5 in the US, and other geos, and a show called The Americans that maybe not from the main plot perspective, but from how those characters interrelate with each other and interrelate with their families and interrelate with their coworkers, very similar to the Sandbaggers. Next slide, please. So I'll move into looking at some web-based media that I suggest you go look for. I'll start with a podcast. Spybrary is a Facebook group run by Shane Whaley. I said up front, one of the purposes of this is to engage and meet people. It's been a joy working with Shane really the last 2 years. And frankly, he's been my mentor on how to better run a Facebook group. And I get a lot of information from him. Initially, again, Spybrary Library, it was focused on literature, but it's moved forward to looking at all media types. As he goes through, he creates these roundtables, which are dedicated podcasts, and he did those on the Sandbaggers. They're between 45 minutes and an hour each. He did one for each series. I was unaware of them up front, and by the time I found it and he found me, it was only time to have the last one done. And actually, one of his roundtable members couldn't make it, so he asked me to join. I'm glad I went in the third series, because I have to say the analysis done by the other people that were engaged on the roundtable panels was tremendous. And as I said, while I love the show, I'll talk about it. I love the overall stories. I'm not the guy that knows the third word of the second episode of the third series, right? But these people did. So I'm glad I did, because it made me go back and watch the third series twice, to be honest with you, right? To better see that. So if you can move to the next, I start combining a couple things at this point in time as well. So two other areas that are dedicated YouTube items. And I do know one of the hosts, one of the creators, Paul Guest is here. I don't know if Paul Chatham made it on. I really have not made it through the attendee list to look at it. But these are created within the last year or so. I'll start with the case files. The case files is created by Paul Guest. The purpose is, again, to engage with him. And I got to talk to him probably for an hour and a half last month. Great focus, great understanding of how he got to the show, similar to mine. And you can see the love of the show and his love of the show in those case files. They are less than 10 minutes each. They cover an episode, and they have a really professionally embedded photo and video. And there's also some humorous ones that they put out there. You see one of the car horns audio loop, and you don't realize how many times you hear the same darn car horn throughout the show. But they also help, let's say, you better understand the episode. And it brings a perspective of explanation that I really haven't seen in any other work related to the Sandbaggers. So as an example, I have never been able to understand, until I saw the case file, the episode of All in the Good Cause very well. It's the first episode of the third series. It's the one with Kane, Darcy, Jenny Ross, MI5, MI6, and American General. And it just, to me, would always go in circles. But when I was able to watch Paul's episode of that specifically, I won't say it answered every single question I had. It didn't. But I'm probably about 90% of the way there when I said I was at best 50-50 before that. So I thank Paul for that. Another YouTube production's Call Me Chatto. That is a YouTube channel done by Paul Chatto, who is a president of a web design company. He was the prior television executive that headed comedy television for CBC, and he's a comedian and writer himself. And again, and in the purpose of using this as a way to engage, I was able to touch base with Paul, and we had about a half-hour call last month. His is a much deeper view. It's about 45 minutes long. So it's kind of like the case file episode on steroids, and goes much more deeper because he has the time to do so. Again, uses the integrated stills and video. Paul, though, because of his background as a television executive, does end up focusing just on pilot episodes and the initial episodes of programs. So he does not go through and cover every single episode of a TV series. I would love him to have done that in the Sandbaggers, but that's not really where he comes from. He looks at the first episode, and some of these are his quotes, and I think they're great. He looks at the casting and the miscasting, the script and the script holes, and the characters and the character holes. So, I say Dean would be proud. I think he would. This is, tremendously deep and professionally put together view, and I think you should go watch it. Next slide, please. And my final slide. And actually, someone asked this question on one of these in the Q&A, so I'll cover it here. So I'll go into what I now call mass media offerings, or offerings that you could just pop over to Amazon and buy a copy of. The first one is the book, The Life and Mysterious Death of Ian Mackintosh, the inside story of the Sandbaggers and television's top spy. Until something I'm going to announce in a few minutes, the only book on the Sandbaggers. There is a new one now, which I'll cover. But unfortunately, you have to look at the publisher, Ian Mackintosh, in big words, and The Life and Mysterious Death in large words as well. Well, the book is a little bit more 360 than that. Nothing against, obviously, Ian's story, because I think there's some areas they go in great depth there with engagement with the family that I had never known before I read the book. But it's a behind-the-scenes look at the development of the Sandbaggers, right? But it also tells Ian's story, and talks about this disappearance, right? And discusses for the first time how that impacted the show and the actors on the show. So Roy talked about that a bit. You'll get a lot more detail on that in Folsom's book. So again, yes, it's about the life and mysterious death of Ian Mackintosh, but it goes into the show and goes into the harmonics of how the show is produced as well. So great book. And then finally, someone had asked the question, where did I get the music? So this year, kind of out of nowhere, someone dropped into our Facebook group, hey, there's a CD out there. So out of Germany came a CD done by Roy Budd. It was primarily the soundtrack to a movie he did just before he worked on the Sandbaggers called Welcome to Blood City. But as the bonus materials, it has his complete set of music for the Sandbaggers. Now, one thing Roy I don't think said today that he focused a lot on at the first dry run last week is there's not a lot of music in the incidental music in the Sandbaggers, because at the end of it, it's all about dialogue, right? And there's a lot of dialogue. And I think I'm going to use Roy's words. There's 3 times the amount of dialogue, per program, per 55-minute program in the Sandbaggers than you find in most television productions. From now for sure, but even more than in that era. So there wasn't a lot of incidental music. But here is the full collection from Roy Budd. All of it, obviously, you hear in the show. Probably a little bit new for some of the listeners that either didn't see the original UK viewing of the show, or ones that are in other geographies, like as an example here in the United States, they have bumpers that go in and out of commercials. So it'll say end of part 1 and the beginning of part 2 before and after a commercial break. There was some incidental music made for that, and you can hear that on the CD. So. All right, if we move on to the next slide, and I am going to introduce Greg Rucka. Greg, very excited to introduce him. As I mentioned earlier, he's authored a complete media series called Queen and Country, which spans the graphic novels, spin-offs of the graphic novels called The Declassified series, a film script, and 3 literary novels written for that. And obviously, Greg has had a long career and continues in his career in many other series as well. So Queen and Country is one of a number of series that he is focused on. Queen and Country is highly inspired by the Sandbaggers and Ian Mackintosh's scripting and methods of scripting. So to me, it is the effective reboot of the series. It was set and started just before the year 2000, and interestingly, had to go through the issues the whole world faced after 9/11. So even some of that work was influenced by that. It centers on an agent named Tara Chase, which we would think of as the equivalent to Willie Kane. And Tara works with Paul Cracker, who's the equivalent to Neil Burnside. I will say this, and he kind of laughed when I said this at the dry run sub, but I'm going to say it again. Greg was the most enthusiastic and just gracious person when I asked him to participate. Had a hard time getting a hold of him and actually had to mail him a letter, which I don't do many letters that I put in the mail. He immediately got back to me and said how honored he was that we would even consider him to be on this. And the whole time he's saying this to me, I'm in back of my mind, I'm like, dude, I'm honored you would do it, let alone we asked you. So I'm glad we came together. The topics I won't go through, but they're very similar to the ones Roy went through. And again, please put the Q&A in, and I'll probably be focused on running through the Q&A right now. So with that, let me turn it over to you, Greg Rucka.
Thank you. I'm going to say it again. I'm beyond flattered to have been invited, and I'm genuinely honored and somewhat embarrassed that I hadn't realized that Sandbagger 2 was named that after Sandbagger 1, which obviously I didn't attend, but I did spend a large amount of money on eBay getting a T-shirt from several years ago. So, for those of you who don't know me, I'm a novelist. I'm a writer. I write novels. I write comics. I've written a few video games. I'm now working a lot more in Hollywood, writing screenplays and teleplays and so on. I am a writer in large part because of meeting Ian Mackintosh's work. It's not the only factor, but it is probably one of the largest factors in the writer I have become. I encountered the show at the impressionable early adolescent age of about 14 on the public television station out of San Jose, California, KTEH at that time. And I was a huge fan of their programming from Britain. It was where I had found Blake Seven. It was where I found Doctor Who. It was where I had found The Prisoner. Not to mention a long list of comedies. And when they started running the Sandbaggers, it was revelatory. I had always had a fascination for espionage. And the reasons for that, I suppose, are another discussion entirely. But like most Americans, and certainly most Americans of that era, my introduction to spy stories was through James Bond, which I knew intuitively weren't. And then suffered the whiplash of going from Bond to Le Carré. And I adored Le Carré, both in print. I was a precocious reader, and the Alec Guinness miniseries of Tinker Tailor and then Smiley's People when they ran. And when I encountered the Sandbaggers, it was the best drama I had ever seen. And even at that age, I understood it as such. And I understood it as such, as I said, intuitively, because of all the complexities of the stories. And they were incredibly complex, even at their most simplistic. Like, even the most simplistic episode of the Sandbaggers is incredibly intelligently crafted. And that intelligence isn't simply in its verisimilitude and its sense of realism versus its actual realism, which is a very narrow divide, but one that I think is crucial in drama. The Sandbaggers, what Mackintosh did so beautifully in those scripts was never to compromise the drama for the realism. And yet that sense of realism was inherent to that drama. The tensions in the show bridged the more simplified romance, the spy story that I had encountered prior, with the realpolitik needs that drove those stories and those plots. And within all of that, crucially, and speaking as a dramatist, never sacrificed the emotionality. Drama doesn't work unless you're invested in it, unless you care about the characters, unless you understand the stakes for them. And I would argue there's not an episode where that isn't evident and that isn't apparent. And when, in later years, when I was talking to people about Queen and Country, I would always say the heart of a Q&C story is that there are always two antagonists. There's always whoever it is who wants to blow up the school bus as it's crossing the bridge full of innocent children, and also Chase's own bosses, her own government. And that's a truth that, and Roy mentioned this when he was speaking about visiting the Foreign Office and how everybody knew the show. I have, since Queen and Country, encountered multiple people with connections in the US intelligence community who have come back and said it's very much like that. The idea that the individual agent or the individual's needs are incidental to government's policy. And government's policy is about self-perpetuation. And that's something that you hear Wellingham refrain over and over again. How many times does he say, for reasons of my own, I would like to see this government stay in power? Governments, for all their other service, exist to perpetuate themselves. So I encountered all of that, and then there was one other sort of secret sauce that, again, being an American in the Reagan era, and on television, I'm getting Magnum PI on mainstream television, and sort of this consumerism, ingestion of violence. It is hard to look back 45 years and realize that the way violence is presented in the Sandbaggers is in and of itself, I think, remarkable and revolutionary. We live in an era where, we've seen Saving Private Ryan in the opening sequence of Storming Normandy. But the first time the first time you watch Karen and Willie go into action on the airplane when they have been taken hostage, that was a staggering moment. These days we look at that and the editing is so much slower and so much more sedate than what we have become used to. But at that time, the first time I saw that, it was almost impossible to follow the action. And that honesty in the depiction of violence and in the effects of violence, the randomness of violence, was staggering to me. And it's something that I think has always fed into my work ever since. It's one of the things that actually moved me into emergency medicine for a little while. My career began as a novelist with a series of books about a professional security specialist who would somewhat scornfully refer to his profession in layman's terms as being a bodyguard. And I created that character because I had been looking to bridge two passions. One was espionage fiction, and the other had been private detective fiction, and ended up in a middle ground that didn't actually do either very well, but became its own sort of series of suspense novels. And then found myself, as a result of that, going into comics. And my second creator-owned comic book was Queen and Country. And Queen and Country is, if I'm charitable, at the start, a poorly reskinned Sandbaggers. It was, in my mind, picking up where it had left off in the world and trying to update it and turn it to not only the genre passion I had, but also some of the issues that I find myself constantly drawn to in my writing. Of those are gender politics and issues of nature and nurture. And Queen and Country grew out of that. And the comics then, I had started the comics always wanting to write novels in that world, because comics are, for all of their wonderful power as a medium, a very constrained medium. You have, even more so than in television or in film, a very limited arena in which to work. And due to that arena, the size, effectively 24 or 26 or 22 pages, with only so many panels on a page, focus is very difficult to share amongst characters. When you get into a novel, those guardrails go down, and you can spend as much time as you want, to the risk of a meandering plot and a boring story. But one can indulge, or at least take those side trails to give characters who in a comic are not necessarily getting as much of the spotlight as one would want, more attention and more care. When QNC came out in the very first issue, I wrote an essay in the back, making no bones about the series Father as I saw it, which led eventually to a connection with, of all people, Ian Mackintosh, Ian's brother, who I don't know if he's still on. and getting to correspond and then speak in person. The series ran for several years. I was able to do 3 novels and a couple of ancillary books, what Paul referred to as the Queen and Country Declassifieds, which were effectively miniseries putting spotlight on other characters at other moments. One of which was written by author and friend Anthony Johnston, who's, I believe, in the audience here today. Ultimately, QNC led me, and when I say QNC led me, the Sandbaggers led me to a job that culminated this past August. There was a movie on Netflix called Heart of Stone that I am credited with the story and a shared screenplay by. I got that job because I was approached by some producers at Skydance specifically, asking if I had any interest in creating a spy franchise with a female lead out of whole cloth. And I remember getting off that call and turning to my wife and saying, so I've just been offered the job I've been training 25 years to do. Heart of Stone, if you've seen it, ended up very different in how it was made from what I originally pitched and presented. It suffered the Rubicon problem, I think. And it's one of the things that I think makes the Sandbaggers still sing today for those of us who know it and for people who find it, which is the Sandbaggers never talked down. It never lowest common denominator. It always expected the audience to step up and to meet it and to trust the audience. Not that everything would become clear, but that the audience would have faith that clarity would come. Mainstream Hollywood media does not believe in that at all. And one can understand how they reached that conclusion because the goal in Hollywood is to make something everybody will see. But the problem with that is they underestimate everyone. And you look at Heart of Stone and like I said, it gives 1 story and 2 screenwriter credits. There were 8 other writers on it after I left. So I got the gig because of the Sandbaggers, I think. That was the start of that journey. And I have written many other stories since. I am going to continue to write many stories. I still put out comics. I'm still working in all of the media I have described. And it is a rare day when I am not in some way acutely aware of the influence Ian Mackintosh's work has had on my life. So I will stop there because I could keep rambling, but I'm more than happy to leave a little time for questions.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Greg. Yeah. I do have a number selected out. Again, they're still coming in, so I'm going to try to process them again. I will send you anything we don't get to. And again, I'm doing my best at doing what I think is the common prioritization across them. So I'll start with one that was a 2-parter. Number one is if you continue Queen and Country, would you do it both as comics and novels, or would you do one over the other? And then the second part of it is, what drove you to portray Crocker as a married family man?
So I think were I to go back to Queen and Country, which I suppose we would need to call King and Country at this point, I want to return, I think, in comics. I find novels, honestly, at this point, very difficult. I had, they're a very isolating process for me. And the last one I wrote in 2015 came out in 2015. It was called Bravo. And it coincided with several things happening in my life, including the passing of my father, and sort of turned me off of that process. I like working in comics because it is a inherently collaborative medium, and in many ways, QNC is first and foremost a comics series. I have thought about it. I have notes for a story called Operation Coppertop. The biggest thing that has held me from sort of re-engaging with the material is time, not my own, but actually how much the world has changed. And it's interesting. The Sandbaggers ends, prematurely at 3 seasons, but in intelligence parlance, most field agents don't have a longevity beyond 3 years unless they're deep cover, unless they have been planted and not activated. 3 years tends to be the life expectancy, meaning use expectancy, not and inevitable death of agents in the field. So one of the factors that has always influenced Queen and Country, and again, it was learned from Mackintosh, from Ian Mackintosh, was how to balance that sense of realism, which is not the same thing as realistic, right, with the fiction. So the longevity of characters from the original Queen and Country, now almost, it's 20 years later, nearly. That is a fictional needle I'm not certain how to thread. And then that's complicated further by the fact that espionage in the world looks so radically different 20 years on, and especially trying to discern what SIS looks like in a post-Trump, post-Brexit world continues to vex me. I've thought about it a lot. I still haven't found my clarity on it. It is not out of the question. I have some ideas, but I have no idea when those will be activated. And then the second question about why I gave Paul a family, because I love the idea that he was a little healthier, I think, than appeared, and I liked the nuance it gave him, that he could be who he needed to be in his job, and that did not sacrifice the rest of his life, that there were challenges there. There's this saw that you encounter a lot in certainly from the writing side in media, which is when characters are quote unquote happy, there's no drama, and that's best illustrated by people who say, well, if these characters hook up, that's the end of the story, right? If you have a will they or won't they, that it ends the story. And I don't believe that. As somebody who's been married for well over 30 years, there's plenty of drama in a healthy relationship. Navigating that drama, navigating the relationship is a worthy story. And I thought it was important to put Crocker in relief that way, to say, no, he can be happily married and still be an absolute tyrant where he needs to be at work. So.
Okay. You actually answered about 6 questions that I had pulled, which is all good. Just by that, and that's all great.
Yeah,
right?
I give long answers, Paul.
It's not that it was long. It traversed many of the questions that have come in. But let me get one that I haven't heard you talk about. Greg, can you talk a bit about starting Queen and Country pre 9/11, and then how did 9/11 impact the rest of the series?
Yeah, it was. I remember writing the first issue. I was in a hotel room for a convention in Chicago, writing the first Queen and Country script, and it having been in my head for quite a while. So the series had we had done 2 stories when 9/11 happened, and the second story had been about what was going on in Afghanistan and the Taliban, and then we had 9/11, and there was a reset moment where I remember speaking to my editor at Oni Press, who were the original publishers of the comic, and amidst everything else that was going on at the time, talking about the fact that there was the series had to address what happened, because again, in that sense of wanting to maintain verisimilitude, it was impossible to, it would be impossible to ignore how the world had just changed and how it was going to impact intelligence services globally. We were now in, a so-called global war on terror. And that, that required a lot of consideration on where did we want to nuance it, where were we going to incorporate it. At that time, and especially in the comics community, I remember this, there were a lot of books being done to raise funds and as sort of testimonial and memorial books. And I remember viewing them very suspiciously. And in fact, many of them haven't aged well. There's a notorious one that Marvel Comics did that features some of the greatest mass murderers in the Marvel Comics universe standing around a smoky Manhattan, looking at the rubble, crying. And I remember seeing that and thinking, that diminishes everything. But we did do a small Q&C piece that was about Tara and her reaction to the news. I'm not sure. I don't remember exactly where we ran that, but it obviously influenced the series going forward. And I'm not certain there's more I can say about that. It certainly affected the direction of the series.
No, that's fine. Let me ask you one last kind of couple-part question. Again, I'm summarizing about 4 or 5 questions that all revolve around a similar theme. If, and I know this is an if Queen and Country move forward to a movie, would you change any of the situations of the characters where you last left them at the end of the, let's say, like the last run? So would you have them in the similar roles and pick up from there, or would you try to do something different? And if you kept Tara and Paul in it, right, without changing the characterizations, who would you have? Who would you like to see cast as those?
Well, I can't. I can't even begin to imagine the casting. There was a time, I will say that, and I say that half lying. There was a time when I thought Sean Bean would make a great Crocker. It would be a little bit against type, but you can see the agent there that he would have been in the field. QNC has been in development hell since 2005. There have been, I want to say, I believe 12 different screenplays done, and they have ranged from brilliant, like the first one was written by a wonderful writer, John Rogers, who's the creator of Leverage, amongst many other shows. He's just a terrific writer, which has the greatest Tara Chase scene ever in it. It's a scene. It's one of those scenes that when I read it, I was like, oh my God, I wish I'd written that. He got the character perfectly. Two versions that have had Tara as a self-abusive cutter, who when she's home alone breaks her crockery and slices up her arms. I mean, I've read versions that make me scream. I don't know if it's ever gonna get made. It is one of the few things. It's one of the few properties of mine that, upon being optioned, when the option expired, the studio exercised its right to purchase, which means I have no rights to a media exploitation of it right now. If I were to, this is the problem. We are in a different era. So if you were to do something like QNC, not something like it, if you were to do QNC in 2024, right? That's when it would probably go into production. You can keep the characters, but you reskin the environments. I think the characters could maintain in much the same way. It's very that requires less gymnastics, but again, one is faced with the problem that I think most espionage literature is facing these days. You see it in Slow Horses, which I saw mentioned in the chat. The outside of the novels, if one has looked at the show on Apple TV, the first season is the quote modern story. The second season has to dig back into the Cold War because espionage literature is always going to be influenced in some way by the Cold War. Mm-hmm. And authors, and I use authors broadly here, are going to be wrestling with that for years to come. In many ways, and I suspect we'll be seeing it starting next year, the war in Ukraine has helped lower the fruit on that tree. I'm going to be interested to see how many stories we see are sort of revert to a Cold War sort of narrative footing with Russia as the traditional big bad again.
The bad guy again. Okay. Well, I will say this as I'll wrap your section up, Greg. First off, I was not aware there were a dozen scripts done for Queen and Country.
That thing has been in development forever.
Well, and I assumed it was in development hell around your script, right? So I was not aware that others had engaged. And
I've never written. I've never written a screenplay for a film version. I only moved into screenwriting really with the old guard.
Okay.
Prior to that, I suffered from what most writers suffer from who are not in Hollywood when they come in from the outside, which is, well, you clearly can write novels and comics, but you cannot write a screenplay.
Yeah.
And it was like, well, actually, give me a chance. You can always fire me later. But no, there have been 12 different versions, including the last one wrapped up sometime last year and was supposed to go into production and didn't get off the ground. And between all of us, I'm kind of glad it didn't. It lowered lowest common denominator.
Okay. Well, how's this? Now that you found us, if it does move forward, hopefully in a much better scenario based on what you said, you'll definitely need to let us know so we can stay engaged with it for sure. So, all right.
I see really quickly Kevin's question. The answer is no.
Oh, yeah.
Tara would not be C in 2023. There's no way. No way.
Yeah. There are several others, but again, in the interest of time, I have to move on. But we'll get those over to you.
Yeah,
Greg.
Thank you very much.
And again, thank you for coming. Really appreciate your engagement and interest, and keeping the love alive of the Sandbaggers. So through your work and through your comments. So
thank you. I really quickly, I just want to say thank you to you and to Jen and to Zoe, and really genuinely flattered and delighted to be here.
There we go. Hey, thank you very much. Jen, can you go forward? Next slide. There we go. So I'm going to quickly cover the two new, I'll call it media items that have come out. Tim, unfortunately, unexpectedly was unavailable today. So I'll volunteer to deliver his slides. A little background on Tim. He's a longtime fan of programs such as The Prisoner and The Sandbaggers as two examples, but he's got a much wider palette than that, but I'll focus on those two. And as an Uber fan, he creates detailed, fan-oriented supporting media. He did it on The Prisoner, and he's done so here for The Sandbaggers, and we're releasing them as part of our 45th anniversary celebration. So I'll start with this technical dossier. So, and a little bit on how Tim works. So out of nowhere in November, probably because I'm one of the active people on the group, I get a private message from him that he says, "Hey, I want to share my book with you and talk about it." So I, in the back of my head, go, well, it must be this guy's concept for a book. He gets hold of me. He goes, "No, the book is done. What I want you is to review it and give me any small edits that you have." I go, like, what a surprise. So what Tim has done, and it's funny, Roy mentioned this because Roy, obviously hasn't seen this yet. But we were talking about sets. So what Tim did in what's called a technical dossier is he looked and freeze framed every single set used in the entire series of the Sandbaggers, and has created super detailed blueprints. You see a copy of one in the middle of each of those sets. So down to the level of what fan was used in the room, what phones are on the table, what plants are in there, are there coffee stations, right? Let alone where the desk is located and all that. And then associated with each of those, there's a write-up on each set. In what episode was it used, and what characters were the ones that were let's say, the owners of that office or that location. And he also evolved them, right? So one question we didn't get to earlier in the Roy Marsden area, but there was a question about how the character of C evolved and how Neil reacted to that. Well, the office of C also evolved. So John Tower Gibbs had a different layout than James Greenlee. So and obviously there were probably 3 or 4 versions of the Neil Burnside office. And you have to remember the way sets are built, right? So some sets, if a production company rents a studio and rents the studio space, they can leave their stuff up. If they rent time in there, then they may have to break down the set and recreate the set. So a lot of work, and that's a big decision which way they go, and it's a big cost decision. So that's why you see some evolutions of sets. But Tim went kind of beyond there, really, and did 2 things. Number one, he started showing sets that should have been made that never were, and that's not a negative statement on the production crew. Willie Kane would have a flat. Laura Dickens would have a flat. And what would they have looked like? And it's not just here's 4 walls. There's a lot of thoughts of, would Willie have a TV? Would he be interested in that? Would he have a single bed? Would he have a double bed? how much of a kitchen would he have, right? So that goes into a lot of background thought process, and I thought that was a real great. And the final thing it did for me is it killed the urban myth of, hey, the Sandbaggers was done on the cheap when it came to sets. Now, they may not have had a deep budget because maybe ITV didn't give deep budgets. I don't know. I'm not obviously part of their finance group from the 70s. But there were a lot of instances where they could have just reused the same office set with the same location of desk and windows and all that. And it's not just putting something up on the wall. They actually have to build those. So those windows are built into a set. It's not just thrown up on the side of a building. So when you look at the head of the Norwegian Secret Service and the French Secret Service and the German Secret Service, they could have reused all those sets. No one would have known. Move a couple plants, change the orientation of the desk. None of us probably would have been any the smarter. They actually created brand new sets for those offices with windows and other structural elements in different places. So Tim caught all that. That's the point, right? So I thank Tim for bringing that out. And again, it's 134 pages, really beautifully laid out. I have a proof copy of it. And then at the end, there's a bonus feature of some maps and photos. If you can go to the next slide. The other thing that Tim did similar way, and since November, Tim and I probably chat every 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks, and especially as we're putting this together, and we message probably twice a week. And out of nowhere, sometime I forget, Zoe, what it was, but earlier this summer, he goes, "Oh, I got my trading cards done." I go, "What trading cards?" Right? And he had asked me for a couple photos and didn't give me the context of why he wanted them. So they are full color 55 trading cards. For those from North America, they're similar to 1978 Topps baseball cards, and they probably had similar in Europe. Glossy photo on the obverse, and then appropriate detail on the rear. Talks about the cast member, their actor, and their biography, but he has them on the production crew. Key producers and directors, Michael Ferguson and the like, have their cards as well, right? And he really goes, because he has 55 to do, very deep into the cast structure of the thing. So pretty much most of the talking roles on the show, if you think down even into the ops room, end up with a card in the series. And then he also has cards for each of the episodes with a deep synopsis. Again, as deep as you can go in the back of a trading card, right? But a deep synopsis of the episode. And he also has, which you could kind of see it a little bit, but he has a 45th anniversary card that he's done as well. So, and I have a proof copy of that as well. Tim is still working out how he's going to on distribution and or purchase of it. So he's working that out, and he will post that to the Facebook group once he gets that worked out. But I'm just very pleased to announce both of those things done by him. I think even to me more special that it was done by a fan who does it for love. And they will be available for all who are interested. So if you can go on to the next slide, and we will now close. So I will close first, and then I'll turn it over to Zoe, who has a couple comments as well. So again, I'm going to thank you, and you'll hear similar themes. Again, a 45-year-old program that was a limited run series in a single market that really wasn't distributed very well globally, at least compared to how you would see a series, such as The Walking Dead or whatever, or The Sopranos, right, sent in the more recent era. And who would have thought there would have been interest? And for that, we have to thank, the creator, writer, directors, actors, producers, professionals that all worked on it. We've already gone through the list, so I won't step through that again. But we wouldn't probably care about it if they didn't do such a good job putting it together, right? And then we have to thank people that like Greg that were influenced by it and are saying, you know what? Yeah, we're in a more modern era, but there is an awful lot that came out of how this was put together that is and should be industry standard. And they keep that alive in the work they do. And again, Greg is a great example of that. We thank him for that. And all the above only happens because you guys are into it. Right. And I'm a fan as much as anyone else. I'm no even better or smaller fan than anyone else. But it is our passion that keeps Greg doing what he does, that's based on what the writers and directors did, what they do. And that's why we get excited when we get new content. So with that, again, I want to thank everyone for attending. Appreciate everyone sticking on. I know we went a little bit over, but was happy to get into the deeper questions with our keynote panelists. With that, let me turn it over to you, Zoe, for your comments.
Hello, sorry.
Yep. Right.
Right, hello. I'd just like to thank you, Paul, not only for all the time and effort that you've put into organising this event, but also for everything that you've done to promote our growing Facebook group. I'd also like to echo Paul's thanks to Roy, to Greg, to Ferox, the presenters, for joining us and for sharing their wonderful stories and comments. And to all the members who have participated in the celebration of the 45 years since the Sandbaggers' first screening. The fact that this, my father's creation, is still so highly regarded and is giving viewing pleasure to so many people is a fitting tribute to his exceptional talent. Thank you for everybody involved.
All right, thank you, Zoe. And again, I think your passion and your a linkage back to the family and the family archives, and your engagement of your uncle and how he supported the group with his really detailed analysis that have been published over the last 3 weeks or so. All great. So the one last thing I will talk about, again, this was recorded, so I will be working with Jen offline on how we get this posted, when we get this posted. I'm about to go off and deal with a good portion of the month doing a bunch of family stuff that has been queuing up. So you'll see some things coming out, but they may not come out in the next day or two, just based on my availability. There was a question that someone asked, will the URLs or where to be able to get some of the materials that we talked about yes, we will distribute those. So, certain items are going to be, the book's not print, so you got to go look at, a bookseller or eBay or Amazon, something like that. But other elements that are available to be ordered, we'll give 2 or 3 matters that one can either view the content or get the content. So that will be coming, but it'll be sometime probably later October. So, all right, thank you all. I appreciate it. And again, thanks for attending. Hope you enjoyed it, and feel free to leave any feedback as well over in the. We've got the comments here, but also feel free to leave them and any posts you want to do over in the main Facebook group. Again, thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your weekend.